Welcome to Amidon Planet. I'm your host, Joel Amidon. Thank you for joining me in this never-ending quest to learn how to teach better. Today on episode 107 of the podcast, a little excited, we have Dr. J.J. Peterson, head of StoryBrand, which is a marketing company that uses the power of storytelling to clarify a business's message and invite customers into a story that makes their lives better. Listening to the Building a StoryBrand podcast is like one of those mile markers on why I wanted to start this podcast. I always had a feeling I wanted to start something, but then hearing J.J. Peterson and his business colleague Donald Miller talk to business leaders about books that they have, written and were, promoting through their podcast, but then also too, how J.J. and Donald, you could see, were like extracting lessons from these texts and from, just the brilliance that people, again, books are amazing, right? People condense everything and into like some big points, and then they put them out into the world that then others can, for $20, around $20, you can grab onto and learn some of those lessons, right? And so, they were always thinking of it from a business perspective and thinking about it for their company, which was growing at the time and has grown leaps and bounds since then, which we'll get into when we get into the episode. But I was always thinking about, well, what do those lessons look like from an educator's perspective, for learning how to teach better's perspective? And then two, they would dive into StoryBrand and how do you, again, leverage story to clarify your message and invite others into a story, right? And so you can kind of see like some of the stuff that I've done through podcasting, where if it's like the road to better teaching is about telling stories about professional development, about teachers developing themselves, and like getting people to see like, here's what does it look like to have a moment in order to develop as an educator. And again, is really hard. And also too, JJ kind of has an infectious, joyful approach to everything that he's doing, and you're going to hear that within the episode as well. And just, he was on a short list that I've wanted to have on the podcast for a long time. One, because of like his role in kind of influencing the mere existence of this podcast. Didn't actually tell that to him, but if he's listening to it, thank you, JJ. But then also too, just to think about how do we as educators or as teachers invite folks into a story, right? Invite your students into a story, right? Invite your parents into a story. Just like, how do we develop? I invite even the community into a story on how we are going to be, they can be heroes for the students that are going through the schools within a community, right? And just thinking about that. And also just thinking about how do we clarify what we do? Because sometimes it can be muddled. Even too, thinking about like, class, and this kind of came through in the episode, but thinking about a class, is it just about helping a student get a grade? Because that's one story, and that's kind of a boring story, and that could be a story for any class, versus what problem am I presenting to my students that they can overcome by learning and applying what we're teaching within the course, right? Or even too, as a parent, versus like, just trying to get you to 18, right? And then get you out, versus, no. How do I invite you into a story where they're being guided to go make the world better through this education that they're experiencing in the household? Trying to get that. Anyway, this is JJ was very generous with his time, so I want to be generous with yours too, or be respectful of yours as well. And so we're going to jump into this episode. Again, this is Dr. J.J. Peterson. He's the head of StoryBrand. He's also the co-author of a book with Donald Miller, the Marketing Made Simple book. They have lots of resources if you're interested in the StoryBrand framework, lots of free resources as well. Just even like, there's even stuff to look at your website and real quick to understand whether or not you got a good website. If you go to their website, we'll put a bunch of links into the show notes. And we'll talk about where you can find those at the end. Well, that's amidonplanet.com/episode 107 if you really want to go there right now. But we'll post links to all that stuff. Without further delay, here's my conversation with Dr. J.J. Peterson, head of StoryBrand. Dr. J.J. Peterson, welcome to Amidon Planet. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was like, talking a little bit beforehand and having my Marketing Made Simple book that you're the co-author of, and in front of me, it's like, hey, JJ's here. This is awesome. So thank you so much.
Oh, this is fun. I'm excited to be on this podcast. I was telling you, before that, my background is in education. That's really even my very first chosen degree was in early childhood education, which I switched many times. Uh,
Oh,
and I come from a long line of teachers. My mom was a teacher. My aunts are teachers. My dad was a teacher. And so I get to talk about marketing a lot with story and all that stuff, but I don't actually get to talk a lot about teaching, and it's a big passion of mine.
that's awesome. The early childhood aspect, I did not know that. And
Yeah,
my wife is currently getting her degree right now in early childhood education. So, and we're a big fan. We have a little lab school on campus here. We're at the University of Mississippi here, and so like
yeah.
we have a little lab school over there where we do a lot of awesome stuff. They've got a pretty good social media presence. They do a lot of like mini football representations, or the baseball season just started yesterday, so they were all hyped up for that too as well. So,
Oh, so
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah, that was my first. I did switch my degree to marketing, but in public relations. But originally, yep, I was all about the early childhood education. So
Yeah. And hearing you on podcasts, I can kind of sense it a little bit. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do make people clap and then snap their fingers and rub
There you
their
go.
hands together.
That's right.
Make the rain noise.
That's great. You're like, JJ's amazing. So there's a little bit of your story that I don't know a little bit about, but right now you're the head of StoryBrands, right? So you're
Yeah.
you're you're big in thinking about marketing research or marketing and how people can put their brands out there. So you're there. So what is your story that led you there?
So my background is in higher education, actually. So my undergrad degree was public relations communications. My master's degree is actually in theology and the arts, and
Oh,
I
wow.
studied like narrative in film and television and kind of the story of God in
Mm-hmm.
those. And then my PhD is in communication. And so I taught communication and leadership at two different universities in Southern California for a number of years. And and I also kind of in that season before and kind of in between, I did, I did marketing for two different nonprofits, international nonprofits. So I did marketing and donor relations and websites and all that stuff for two different big nonprofits. So that was kind of my world, was like marketing, public relations, and higher education, and kind of the combo of those two. But I also dabbled in entertainment. And so I did a little bit of acting, and I toured and did some improv comedy for a while. And in my last job before StoryBrand, I was the dean of students at a university in Southern California.
Wow.
So I was on the student development side of things, but I still taught and everything. So I was dean of students, and I had sold a reality television show to a production company.
Oh my God.
So, as you do when you live in Southern California.
Right.
And I had sold a reality television show. So I was leaving the school to kind of pursue that side of things.
Wow.
And I invited one of my favorite authors, Donald Miller, to come and speak to my students, kind of as my farewell to myself, really. We were
Yeah.
doing this big, beginning of the year kickoff. And I brought him in to speak about the hero's journey and how to
Mm.
overcome tragedy and how to kind of find redemption in dark moments. And so I had him come and talk. And I said, I shared my story and that I was leaving. And he's like, well, I'm just starting this thing called StoryBrand. Would you be interested in coming out and kind of, because you're rebranding yourself in the television world, do you want to come out and try to brand your television show and kind of what you're doing? And I said, sure, I'll come check it out. And I flew out to Nashville from LA and went through the process of figuring out how to clarify my own message through through story framework, which is what StoryBrand does. We
Yeah.
companies create clear marketing and messaging using narrative frameworks, and so I did that, and I just fell in love, and I fell in love with the process. And being a teacher and professor, what happened for me is I'm in this room with Don and about 40 other people, and he's just doing it himself, kind of like walking around doing one-on-one coaching. And because my background was in narrative, I understood it instantly and I got it. And I stopped working on my own and I just started helping people because that's what you do when you're you learn it and then you turn around and help other people. And so I started helping the other people in the room. And then he was like, well, would you mind, since you're still waiting on this TV show, like flying back and forth from Nashville to LA and help me teach people and help me kind of communicate this, basically like expand it, because he was the only person teaching it at the time.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how it started, as I was flying back and forth from LA and Nashville while the TV show was happening and doing that. And then eventually the TV show didn't go anywhere, as also happens often in LA. And I decided to move to Nashville, and we kind of built this thing about 10 years ago. So
that is an amazing, knowing, a little bit about StoryBrand, and we're going to get a chance to talk a little bit more about that in a second, but hearing your background, and I was like, I could just see like Don, like, is this guy for real? Like, this is like perfect. This is
well, it really was my whole life.
Amazing.
People were always like, you've done so many random things. Like, I did things literally in Hollywood. I was a professor. I was a dean of students. I created curriculum. I also wrote screenplays. I directed a documentary. I did marketing for nonprofits. So I did all of these things that just felt, truthfully, until I came here, all jumbled. Nonprofit marketing, entertainment, and teaching. And then literally that's what I do now, is I help people with their marketing. I teach them about it, and I use Hollywood narrative formulas to do it.
Yeah. Well, and let's not say yourself short. You were also in a Missy Elliott video. Come on now.
I was. I danced in a Missy Elliott, the first 3D music video ever produced.
Oh, I didn't know it was the first 3D. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yep.
And we could put a link to that in the show notes.
Please don't. Please don't. I'm just kidding. It's Ching-a-ling. Ching-a-ling.
Yeah.
For about 3 seconds.
So, I mean, and it's so great. I mean, it's like, this story, like the story you just told about your story, and like how that intersected with Don Miller's story. I mean, already, like, and again, you get the audience leaning in, and that's what's cool about podcasts, is telling the story. But like, why are stories so powerful?
The story really is what I would say, it's a sense-making device. So when you use the power of story, what you're doing is, and the formulas of story, you're taking information, all the information that's out there, and narrowing it down. Basically, most people don't know they're doing this, but they're kind of filtering it through a formula and putting it in a way that helps make sense of the story for an audience. So even like, as I'm telling you my story, I'm filtering out the other things that don't necessarily pertain to the information that I want to lead you in. Right? So because I can also say, yes, I was a weight room supervisor and I worked at a pizza parlor. Like, I could tell you other jobs that I had, but those don't actually contribute to the conversation and the clarity or even the interesting parts of a story.
Yeah.
And so that is ultimately what happens, is when people tell good stories, they're actually filtering information down through a series of rules, whether you know them or not, into a tight piece of information that actually is designed to change people's thoughts or actions. And it really goes even all the way back to Aristotle and Plato. They argued back even in Poetics that the best way to change culture, to create a great society, was through story. That story it's not only a sense-making device from that sense, but the reason why it becomes then even more powerful is because it's actually a reflection of our reality. Stories, when told well, like a movie or a book, what they're doing is they're actually helping us make sense of our own lives, because they're actually kind of pointing you towards information and context that actually helps you make sense of the other things that are going on in your life when done well. When they're done poorly or you don't follow the rules, that stuff doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But when you actually do stories well and you follow the formulas of story, the rules of story, you're organizing information in a way that helps people actually make sense of their own circumstances, and ultimately, done well, moves them to action.
That's yeah. I just thinking about the power, like, I don't know, I think they did some research on people doing like TED Talks, and like when they start with a story, and it's like it gets the audience almost like vibrating, or like all in sync together, like, oh, just leaning in, all waiting for that, just like a good movie or whatever. I mean, and that's the thing, like we're all familiar with these things, even
Yeah.
from you're talking about it way back when. For some reason, I don't know why, but this got me thinking about like the Aeneid, which was like the Roman story of greatness. That was just basically hey, we just took the Odyssey and the Iliad, we collapsed it, we put it together, so we have our great story of Rome and how it was. And it was like kind of like, hey, let's make sense. We're a great society. We're trying to make ourselves a great society. We need to have our great story that kind of backs up, like, hey, this is why we're great, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it leaves out all the parts that aren't great, and it leaves all the
Yeah,
parts that
yeah.
you want to help people focus on what you want them to focus on, and that's where there's a lot of different, obviously people have studied a story a lot and
Yeah.
and there's a lot of different things to it. But I think for me, when it comes down to it, why story for me, why I'm drawn to story is it's really the quickest way for me to communicate what I would argue is truth, that actually it allows people to hold on to. Like, because we're used to stories, we live our life as a story. When we hear a good story, we are actually able to latch on to that in a way that stays with us. And I do think, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but I think like there is a difference between truth and fact. And fact is often boring, and sometimes truth is more powerful, right? So,
Mm,
like, if I say to you that my partner is my better half, that is truth, but it is not fact, right? Like,
hmm.
and so it's not, this person is not literally half of
Right.
me
Hmm.
that we're split together and put together. But if I say this is my better half, that actually communicates a truth about the way I feel about this person. It's
Right.
an analogy. And so I can actually extrapolate more truth from story or analogy sometimes than I actually can from fact.
Yeah.
And people can hold on to it in a stronger way. So we're getting kind of, I'm suddenly going a little deep here, but really,
That's all good. No, I love it.
the I think when we're talking about, say, in the context of teaching in particular, I think those of us who are trying to convey knowledge and are trying to convey or challenge people to think in new ways, not just like, here, memorize these facts, but
Hmm.
we're actually calling people to look at things from a different angle and internalize things. Really, there's so much research on that. The best way to do that is through narrative, and using the power of story. And that doesn't mean you always have to tell like a funny story. It doesn't mean you always have to tell a dramatic or sad story or a very moving story in the sense that it's like it's emotional because somebody died. That's not what we're talking about when we're
Yeah.
talking about the power of story. What we're talking about is using narrative frameworks. So, using ways to filter information, using frameworks to filter information in a way that actually connects with an audience and makes sense to them, helps them memorize it easier.
So maybe it seems like this is a good time to then say, okay, JJ, that sounds awesome. Like with the whole, like how we can use those frameworks, those narrative frameworks to help us clarify our message. Okay, but then how does that connect to marketing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
is amazing. I mean, like it is
yeah.
amazing. Like
It
how did,
is. And so what we've done at StoryBrand is we've studied story and basically broken it down into what is the most basic form of story that exists. I mean, you can go more basic than this, truthfully, but like in one of its most basic forms, there are 7 elements that have to be included in any story to make it a good story. And you'll see this in Hollywood movies, you'll see this in books, you'll see that even in TV shows. You'll see the basic principles here that all movies are exactly the same. The first is that there's a character who wants something. So there's a hero of a story, and very early on in that story, we need to know what that hero wants. The next thing that has to happen in a story, second, number two, is that that hero has to encounter a problem. For the story to be good or interesting, the main character has to come up against a problem that gets in the way of what they want. So Katniss wants to save her sister and win the Hunger Games, but she has to actually, problem is she has to compete in the Hunger Games.
Mm-hmm.
So literally a problem comes up right away. And then we spend the rest of the movie trying to see if the hero is going to overcome that. Then that we know as an audience, the hero can't overcome that problem on their own. So they meet a guide, somebody who actually has been there and done that, who has gone ahead of them and is smarter, wiser, already won the day. So in movies, we see Yoda, we see Obi-Wan Kenobi, we see Gandalf. In Hunger Games, we see Haymitch. There's always a guide, somebody older and wiser to help the hero win.
Mm-hmm.
That's step 3. Step 4 is that the guide gives the hero a plan, so that you will almost hear that in every movie, like, what's the plan, or here's the plan. There's always a way forward for the hero to win. Then there's a moment that the hero must be called to action. That's step 5. The hero has to, like, a bomb is going to go off, so there's a countdown timer. And then we know that there are stakes in the story that can either have a happy ending, which we call success, or a tragic ending, which we call failure. And both of those things have been foreshadowed through the story, that we are rooting for a happy ending. We know what that life is going to look like, and we are trying to help them avoid pain. So those are the 7 elements. A hero who wants something, who has a problem, who meets a guide, who gives them a plan, calls them to action that results in either success or failure. So how does that have to do with marketing then?
Yeah.
What we realize is that we all really, every human out there we are the main character of our own movies in our own life, right? We are the hero of our own story. And what the hero's journey is about is overcoming those problems, right? Through the whole thing. So as a business, what you have to recognize, or anybody getting up on stage, or even, quite frankly, anybody in a classroom, especially when you're dealing with adults or, college students, is you have to realize your audience, whoever is in front of you, whether you're marketing or speaking, they are living out their own hero's journey in that moment. And in order to actually invite them into a story that will connect, move them, and cause their mindset to shift, you have to position them as the hero of the story. So identify, what is it that they actually want out of this class, out of their life? What are they looking for in regards to your product? What do they want? Then, what problems are they experiencing that you are there to help them overcome? And you then talk about those problems. Then you position yourself as the guide. You are not the hero of your story. If you are a professor, if you are a teacher, if you are a speaker in public, if you are a business, you are not the hero of the story. Your audience is, your customers is, you are the guide. And so you need to think of yourself in those ways. How do you position yourself as a guide to help the hero win? Well, part of the way you do that is you give them a plan. What are the steps they need to take in order to win the day? What is their call to action? How do you give them a strong call to action to act? And then how do you forecast for them or foreshadow for them what their success will look like if they follow what you say, or what will a failure look like if they don't? And in marketing, what you're looking to do is create those 7 pieces for your marketing messaging. If you can create the 7 talking points around those 7 elements of story, you're going to have a clear story that positions your customer as the hero and you as the guide, and you both win in the end.
That's awesome. And it just makes me think about, like, I just had a class where we were talking about lesson planning. And a lot of times when you might, the challenge to get these pre-service teachers to not act like they're the vision of teachers, like, where it's like, I'm up front, I'm going to be just talking in front of you for a bunch of times, but basically, like, to present a problem to them, like, hey, like, for one student was doing order of operations, be like, hey, present a problem where you don't know, if you don't know the order of operations where this person's getting this number, this person, this number, oh my God, this is a problem, right? This is like, we can't have this. Like if people did this, we would never know like what the answer is supposed to be, right? So we need to have some sort of way of understanding how to do these things. So now if they've seen that problem now, oh my goodness, we need this now. So now there's a need to learn, and like, oh, here comes the guide of the teacher or to come up with something, or maybe someone already knows some of these rules on how to put those in. So now we can bring them in and let them again be the hero and help solve like, how do we do these sorts of things? I mean, even something as dry as that, I mean, is using some of those similar principles.
Absolutely. I mean, so like, let's just take I do this all the time when I'm in front of live audiences, say like at a conference or something like that. Yeah. But I actually do this with my students as well. So I teach marketing at Vanderbilt in their Masters of Marketing program.
Another SEC school. It's okay. It's all good.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yes. Yeah, you're okay. We can still.
We're fine. We're fine.
So and when I go in on the first day, I don't stand up and say, "Hi, I'm Dr. JJ Peterson. I'm really excited to be here. What's your name?" No, nope, I don't do that. I don't say, "All right, take out your syllabus. We're going to read the syllabus." I do not do that either. I walk up in front of the classroom and I say, most marketers waste an enormous amount of time and money on marketing that doesn't work. And if you're going to go look for a job after you graduate from here, and you're going to basically continue the same tired old systems that aren't working for companies now, you not only are going to fail quickly in the marketplace, but so will the company that you work for. I don't introduce myself. I don't say anything. I start with a problem of why they need to pay attention to the rest of the class. Like not just that class, but the rest of like the whole semester. We do in modules. So we do a 10-week module. So it's like, why do they need to pay attention for the next 10 weeks? Well, their career and their company that they work for is at stake.
Yeah.
And I need to put that right up front. So then I ramp those up a little bit more by bringing in statistics about marketing and how much people are making in marketing and what's, all this different stuff. I just kind of ramp it up. And then I position what the classroom's going to be like the rest of the time. And so because you are set up for failure, AI is about to take over the world in your space. So how are you even going to get a job when the computers are going to replace you? And I start talking about that. And then I go, well, so in this class, what we're actually going to do is I'm going to teach you how to have a point of view so that actually you're never going to be replaced by AI. I'm going to teach you the simple sales funnels that you're going to be able to create in order to not only make yourself incredibly valuable, but your business is going to grow too. Well, now they're in because I didn't start out with talking about me. I didn't start talking about my class. I started with a problem they are going to experience, whether they know it or not. I'm agitating a problem in them before I say anything about myself. And that's really part of what it means to be a good guide is when you get up, you're not talking about yourself. You're not telling your story. You're telling your audience a story, your customer story. And that means start with their problems. Why should they even pay attention to you? Because they're experiencing some kind of problem, or what you're about to tell them is going to prevent them. Now, in some cases, it's literally that this is going to be on the test, and if you don't listen, you're gonna fail. I mean, like it's like you can start when you start a class that way. It's like, hey, everything I'm about to say is going to be on the midterm, and if you don't pay attention, you will fail the midterm. Well, the computers, like their pencils go down. Everybody's paying attention at that point because you just gave them a problem. Right. And that's the power of like, that's a story. Not like I don't get up and go, so when I was in a Missy Elliott music video, let me tell you that. That's telling a story where I'm telling my story. But if I actually want to invite them as my audience into a story that they get to be the hero of, I always have to start with their problem.
Well, and think about those two problems that you just presented. Like the one is these are all on the midterm. Like you need to listen to every word I say and blah, blah, blah. Like that problem is I want the problem to get a good grade in the class and to, which could be the story of every class that someone takes at an institution versus like you coming in and saying, hey, here's the landscape. Here's the issues. Here's the problem. Now, if you follow me on this journey, now you're going to be better equipped to do the job, that the whole reason why you're in this class in the first place, rather than just getting the grade. That's beautiful.
Because you can get up and say, like you said, it can be about the grades, or it can be about the, if you're at the university, like you guys or your parents spent a lot of money on this and you're waiting, and it's like, they don't care. They don't care. Yeah. But if they're going to look stupid after they leave my class, or they're not going to succeed, now they care. Yeah. And so that's the story I have to position the class as. And like I said, I do that in the classroom. I also do that when I'm, and I try to remember to do that for literally every single class session. Mm-hmm. What I'm trying to think of, if I'm going to walk in and I'm going to teach them how to write emails, what problem does this class solve for them? If I'm going to teach them how to write headlines for a website, what problem does this class solve? I'm going to teach them how to do lead generators. What problem? And so the first 10 minutes of all of my class has nothing to do with the actual information I'm going to teach them. The first 10 minutes has to do with me ramping up that problem, so that I'm basically saying, hey guys, it's bad out there. And guess what? It's worse. And guess what? It's worse than that. And then the worst thing is, it's the worst ever. But guess what? Here's how to write a sales email. and I don't get that dramatic with it, but that's kind of anybody, I think, teaching in front of an audience or getting up to speak. That's how you want to start thinking about getting up on stage. It's not about your story. Your story doesn't matter to them. Their story matters. So how do you position what you're about to say as part of their story? Start with the problem that you are going to solve by being on stage.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and I'll give this to y'all, because I teach elementary math methods class. So elementary teachers, sometimes they don't, the image of themselves teaching doesn't necessarily incorporate teaching math, right? Maybe they want to, teach reading and stuff like that. And so sometimes when they're coming to my class, they haven't thought about that, or they haven't considered that, or they're trying to avoid, or they know that this is, again, something that they need to pass through. But thinking about y'all with those two, the thing about success and failure, right? If they do happen to be the teacher of mathematics for a child, you can be an agent of change and provide the benefit for this child going forward in what you teach them, or you could be an instrument of inequity, right? And literally, because there's no neutral ground there. When you're there's no neutral teacher. There's no just mediocre. No, you're either helping or you're hurting. And so trying to say, like, hey, if we're going to do this, if we're going to step into this role, there are stakes. And you're saying, you're entering in and giving them ideas about, hey, there's stakes in this class that you're taking.
Absolutely. And that's what makes a story, everything we're talking about is what makes a story interesting and makes it memorable. And that, like, all those different pieces, and like starting with the problem and bringing in the stakes, that makes a story interesting and memorable. When a story is interesting and memorable, or even kind of on a deeper level, memorable means that it was easy to remember, which usually means that it's cohesive.
Right.
And the fact that it's interesting, it kind of sticks together and works. It has fidelity. So 2 words in kind of the research realm of things that are used when it comes to story is it cohesive, and does it have fidelity? If a story has, let me back up for a second. There's a theory called narrative transportation. Narrative transportation is the idea that when you see a good story on a screen, or when you read a good story, that you actually put yourself in that story. So if you've ever jumped when something was scary, or you've like cried when something sad happens, you've experienced narrative transportation. You've actually, like, almost physically, but definitely emotionally, put yourself in that story.
When Tom Cruise steps outside the building in that Mission Impossible 4 and is like up the big building, I'm like, yeah, I can't even, I'm getting back on the couch.
Yeah, my stomach flips. My stomach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But that's narrative transportation. We start putting ourselves in that story, right? Even like, I was watching The Walking Dead on AMC. And at the same time, like, in the same period of time, I was playing a game on my phone called Plants vs. Zombies. Uh-huh. And I remember having the thought, as I was playing Plants vs. Zombies, wow, this is really insensitive to be playing this game while my friends are dying at the hands of real zombies. And I was like, and I really like was about to put the phone down because I was like, I felt like I was betraying the memory of my friend. And I was like, that's not my friend. That's not real.
Yeah.
Like, go outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's narrative
Go outside.
transportation.
Yeah.
That is narrative transportation. Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting to me anyway, is that when the more cohesive and more fidelity a story has, and there's some other rules that go into like this, but they can actually measure the level of narrative transportation people experience. So the better the story, the more narrative transportation. The higher levels of narrative transportation people experience, the more influence that story has on their thoughts and their actions. So the better the story, the more moving it is. And then from a marketing side, it goes even further to say that that can happen. Narrative transportation can happen in as little as a website or a tweet or Instagram post. But kind of the point of it is that when you include all the pieces we've been talking about, like when you were talking about the stakes in the story, or we're talking about the problem, or we're talking about the plan that somebody has, or a clear call to action, those rules of story force your information, force the story to have more fidelity and coherency, which means that more people will experience higher levels of narrative transportation, which means your story will be actually more memorable and more impactful. And like I said, that happens in a tweet, but it can happen in the classroom. So students are going to remember my lectures more if I put them in a narrative framework, which is starting at the beginning with their problem, identifying what it is that they want and starting with their problem, then ramping the problem up. Then I come in and position myself as a guide. And the way you position yourself as a guide is with empathy and authority. So I say, look, I get it. I get being out there is kind of scary. I went to college and felt like when I graduated my degree, we didn't do what I wanted it to do. Empathy, I feel that. But what I'm about to teach you has been taught for, thousands of years. And I was just with Microsoft last week and they're using the same principles, right? So then I'm bringing in authority. Then I give them a plan and I say, so here's what this semester is going to look like. And I lay it out for them, very clear steps. And then I give a call to action. We're actually going to, by the end of this, you are going to put together an entire sales funnel. And then I give some success and failure. When you actually go through this process multiple times, you are going to, and then I cast a vision for what their life can be like if they follow what I'm going to say. And then I talk about failure. What does it look like if they don't? Or you can just lose out to AI in the marketplace.
Yeah.
So if I do that, if I position my entire lecture with those points in there, that actually invites them into a story that they get to be the hero of. They get to then again, they get more narrative transportation, which ultimately means that they are more impacted by what I said. Or I can just get up and go, all right, today we're talking about emails. Let me tell you my five favorite emails that I write all the time. And let me tell you how to write them. No, that's not a story.
Yeah.
But I can convey that exact same information with those other points. If I'm disciplined in the points that I'm making, I invite them into a story and then they're excited to write the emails and they know why they're writing the emails.
Yeah. Let me just curious if this goes along with this principle. So in the Marketing Made Simple podcast, you call listeners. You don't just call them listeners. You call them hero makers. Uh-huh. Is that the same? I mean, because when you call it, oh yeah, I'm a listener. I'm a hero maker. I'm putting these principles into action. Is that same idea of this narrative transfer?
It is. And that's another piece that I haven't really talked about yet, but that's called identity transformation. So any good story arc. So each of the elements that I've talked about are kind of the elements that happen within a story. But every story also has a beginning and an end arc that the main character goes through. And you can actually describe them as one way in the beginning of the story and another way at the end. So Luke Skywalker is kind of an orphan who's lost he's a little bit lost. And by the end, he's a Jedi, right?
Yeah. Farmer to Jedi. Yeah.
Yeah. Farmer to Jedi. Katniss becomes the Mockingjay. You literally can name something in there, but most people, it's more simple than that. It's they were alone and now they're loved. They were afraid and now they're brave. They were insecure. Now they're confident. But you can actually describe the main character, the hero, as going through a transformation. If the hero of a story doesn't go through a transformation, there is no story. I mean, it's not a good story and people are not engaged. When you're talking about communicating through marketing or again, communicating from the stage, what you want to do is think to yourself, how would I want to describe my audience or my customer after they've bought from me or listened to my lecture? And you, as the speaker, as the person, as the business person, you want to identify literally, how would I describe them? So like for me, with my students, I want them to be marketing ninjas by the time they're done. That's their aspirational identity. And so what I have to then, as their guide, do is continue to affirm that transformation that's happening along the way. In a good movie, you'll always see the guide, like at the end of the story, comes back and does like almost like a hat tip to the hero.
Yeah.
There's like a wink or a nod. In Star Wars, it's that the Jedis show back up as ghosts and kind of just give a little like knowing nod. And what they're doing is at the end, they're affirming the transformation of the hero. They are saying, you did it. You became who you wanted to be. You won the day. So for us as, again, marketers or teachers, one of the helpful things for me is to identify what is my audience arc? What is my student's arc through this story? And how would I describe them? How would I want to describe them? Or how would they want to be described at the end of my class, at the end of my semester? And for me, that's Marketing Ninja. So throughout then the course of the semester, I am naming that transformation in them. I am saying, man, you guys are becoming marketing ninjas. Man, did you just see that trick you just pulled? That is a ninja move, right? And I am kind of dropping that in. Now, I may not always use ninja. I may substitute expert. I may substitute, superstar, something along those lines. But I'm naming that in my students because what that does, again, is it helps them see the transformation happening and they embed that transformation in them. Now, you can't blow smoke or platitudes.
Right.
But what you're doing in that is you're actually getting them to envision and own the change that is happening in their lives. So if they actually are becoming a better teacher through the process of working with you, you want to name anytime you see them being a good teacher or a great math teacher, or that's going to change a kid's life because of what you just said, you want to name that in them. That helps them own it. And again, helps with that narrative transportation, which ultimately does transform them. When they enter, and this is what this is all about. So let me back up a second. This is not about manipulating people into listening and paying attention to you. This is actually helping them change their thoughts and actions to what is going to be helpful for them. This way it can be very dangerous in the wrong hands. But for those of us, like you're genuinely in your class trying to help them become good teachers, which is what they want to become. And they will ultimately change the world because of that. Now, so you want them to take on that mantle and take on that idea of like, yes, I am a good teacher. Yes, when I teach, I can be a world changer. And if you can get them to take that on by going through the story that you're calling them into, they're better off because of it. And then the people that they serve are better off because of it. So this is not just about manipulating or like kind of trying to trick people to pay attention like, oh, you're quote unquote the hero. No. They're already living this journey. They're living this story. You are helping them make sense of it. And you are helping them follow the right path to transform themselves to become who they want to be.
Yeah. Well, and I guess if you're, blowing smoke, as you said, like you're losing your authority, right? Because they'll know like, well, that wasn't
Absolutely.
That was good. And even too, thinking of one of your colleagues at Vanderbilt, Lana Horn, she talks about complex instruction in math classrooms. And one of the things she'll talk about in complex instruction is about calling out competence, right? Specific, academic, and public, right? And making sure like, hey, I saw how you asked this question. That question generated great responses that led to some awesome thinking within your group, and making that public so that then they can, but then naming it. I like the way you say naming it and being like, man, you're executing. What we want is being a doer of mathematics, right? We want to see people take on that identity rather, because a lot of people don't take on that identity. So how do we help them see that? Because we know that not only is it better if they know mathematics or they see themselves as doer of mathematics, but math is better if if we have more people doing mathematics as well and see themselves as doers. But yeah, that's great. You're giving us a masterclass here. Thank you, JJ.
Okay.
This is good. Well, and again, I had a whole list of questions, but I want to honor your time as well. There is this, and again, thinking about interacting with you through the content that you and Donald Miller have put out, and just listening to the Marketing Made Simple podcast, and even just seeing your other guest appearance on other podcasts, there always is like this joy that it kind of comes from a sense of joy in the work. I guess, where does that come from? What would you say is your guiding philosophy for your teaching? And you've kind of talked about that a little bit, but I guess, is there anything more to that story?
Life is just better when I'm joyful. So
Yeah.
I think
there's
that. I wish there was a more complicated answer, but I just enjoy life a lot. But and I want to help other people enjoy as well. So I think that's kind of a lot where it's driven from. And like I said, I come from a long line of people who are teachers and pastors and who gave of themselves for other people. So I had some incredible guides myself in that. But I think that if I'm really, again, I'll probably go a little too deep here, but we go back to narrative theory, okay, so in stories, there really are four main characters in a story. There's the hero, the villain, the victim, and the guide. And the real reason why all four of these exist is because they exist in all of us. That is actually a reflection of the roles that we play in life. And there's a couple different ways of understanding this. And the way that I look at it is really the victim in a story, the person who stays a victim. The story is never about them. It's not a good story. A victim story is not a good story. They just exist in the story to either make the villain look bad or the hero look good. That's it. Now, in the world, there are real victims but what often happens is we sometimes play the victim. And I began to realize that when I play the victim in my own life, all I am there is I'm an energy sucker from everybody else, and I will never write a good story. Victims who stay victims are true victims, but in order for it to be a good story, victims have to overcome and move forward. And that's really where you move into the next two people, the villain and the hero. Typically, the villain and the hero in a story have a similar backstory of pain. You see, even in many, villains, that they have like a scar on their face. That's to show you that they've gone through something. They've been through it. But typically, even in a movie, it'll be like both the villain and the hero, they both lost a daughter.
Yeah.
The hero chooses to redeem the pain and fights to redeem it. The villain works to revenge the pain. And it's the same kind of thing, is that like in those moments where I am a victim or where I start to feel like a victim, I have the ability to either lash out at people, but that makes me the villain, or because if I'm causing other people pain because of my pain, I become the villain. And if I actually work to redeem my pain, then I become the hero of the story. And then ultimately, if you really move on past the hero journey, you become a guide. So every guide was at one point a hero. They had the ups and downs. They had to learn themselves how to win the day, but then they won the day and they're actually confident. They don't go through a story of transformation in a movie. A good guide does not change. They're the same from beginning to end. They're just there to help other people win. And so for me, I often, as I was processing this, I really was like, okay, do I want to be in my life a victim or a villain as little as possible? Is
Yeah.
what I get to,
Hmm.
And so what that means is that in those moments where I do struggle, because it's not that I'm always happy and I'm always good,
Right.
is that there are moments of pain, there's moments of suffering, and there's moments of just feeling sorry for myself, quite frankly, in that. And yet in that moment, I have a choice to either stay there, cause other people pain out of it, or actually be the hero and begin the process of moving towards redemption. And when I move towards redeeming my own pain, then I can actually learn to redeem it for others. And so that's kind of where I'm saying I talk to myself a lot about that. Is like, are you being a villain? Are you being a victim? Are you being a hero? Or are you trying to be a guide here? And I really try to live more of my life in the hero and guide space than I do the victim and the villain. And what's interesting is there actually is, and I wish I had this research off the top of my head, but there's so much research out there that really says the way that you actually find more joy is by helping other people. Like if you have something like, if you, if I go on a trip to Rome, just something big like that, my first time to Rome, I have most amazing enjoyment. If I go back to the same places in Rome the second time, for me, it won't actually be as enjoyable. There's research. The only way that that joy comes back to the same level it was at the beginning is if I take somebody else with me and
Yeah.
I help
Hmm.
them experience it and I show it to them. And it's same thing like if I get given a car or buy a car, I can be really joyful about it. If I go back to try to recreate that same exact feeling by buying another car, it won't happen. But if I give that car away, I can actually feel that joy even at a higher level. So there's a bunch of research around that when you actually give your life away as a teacher, as somebody who's there to help other people win the day, if you're truly living out of that guide space, you actually have a measurable higher level of joy than people who only live in the self-serving space. And that doesn't mean we don't have self-care, we don't have
Right.
boundaries, all of those things that you and I know,
Yeah.
that being a mature person, you do have to take care of yourself. This is not being a martyr. This is not giving, give till you drop. No, no, no. But it does mean that if you actually orient your life around helping others succeed, there is research that shows that there is actually measurable difference in the amount of joy that you experience. And so I try to just put myself in that space as much as possible, and it helps me kind of live in that joyful spot as well.
Well, I was going to ask you, thank you for sharing that, JD. I appreciate it. But I was even going to ask you the question about how can we, like in education, be better about, sharing our own story, sharing being a better marketers and things like that. But just even that's what you just shared right there. And how do we help pour into others and just tap into that joy of serving others. I mean, which is why we wanted to be in this space in the first place. But thinking about it is kind of amazing that every year, like when I was a high school math teacher, I'd see all these light bulbs go off around the law of cosines. It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Like they think that makes
Yes.
sense, Mr. M. And I'm like, yeah, like wow, yeah. And there's some joy there. But I don't know, is there any other I know I want to honor your time, but any other things that you wanted to share about that? You kind of gave us a lot of ideas throughout this episode about that, but just how, schools or education or subject area could we just be better about, maybe we just need to all come and take, take your class. I don't know.
I just think well, for me, like I said, the way that if I can be the guide that always I win in that, and then other people win, and I mean that in that like they actually retain the information that I give them and they actually use it in a way that moves them forward. And so I think if more people who are in this space, I think sometimes we think that we have to be like, we have to be more funny. We have to be more entertaining by bringing in more clips and more things. And all of that stuff matters. It does matter in engagement. But the reality is if you enter into any space and view yourself stepping into that space as the guide, you don't have to be the hero. It actually takes so much weight off of your shoulders. Like same thing at Vanderbilt, when I walk in, I don't have to feel like I need to impress these kids. I don't, because I'm not there to impress them. That would be me being the hero. I'm there to help them win. And the best way I know how to help them win is by positioning anything I'm about to say by talking about the problem they're experiencing before I do anything else. And I think if you can have that mindset of, I'm going to be a guide, it relieves us a lot. It's also more effective. And then if the easiest tip I can give you is that every time you start talking, position before you talk about anything else, talk about your audience, your students, your customers' problems. If you talk about that first, you frame the entire story, everything you're about to say as being important and about them winning. And those two things, if you can do that, I think that'll change the way you teach.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, JJ. This is great. There's a Marketing Made Simple podcast. I got my Marketing Made Simple book here that you're the co-author of with Donald Miller. Anything else to promote that we can share and we can put links to on the show notes?
I mean, if anybody's interested in going through this as a workshop, we actually take businesses and individuals through this as a workshop. We do it 5 or 6 times a year, and it's kind of over 2 days. And we help you actually create what we call brand scripts. So you create the messaging I've been talking about with a coach. So I teach some of it, and then Dawn teaches some of it, and then you go through it individually with a coach. You can find that at storybrand.com/live. storybrand.com/live. And you can see when the next one's coming up and maybe join us.
Awesome. Again, I had one podcast. So this is like 106 or 7 and maybe 8 episodes that we've done, somewhere in like around the 50s, or maybe I said, here's a list of people that I want to have on the podcast, and you're on the list. Because I mean, I've gotten so much out of what you have shared, and then just also too, just the way you interact with others, honoring people with your exchanges has been a pleasure to listen to those, and now it's been a pleasure to have this conversation. So thank you so much.
Well, it's an honor for me to be here, and it's an honor to honestly talk to the teachers out there, because I am one of you. I know what you're going through, and I'm impressed that you're still in it.
Awesome.
I love it.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate you. All right, there he is, Dr. JJ Peterson. 1, I'm really excited that he came on. 2, really excited for how generous he was with his time. 3, now I'm thinking, right? And that's the whole point of the podcast, is to be thinking, right? I'm thinking, how do I leverage story better in my teaching? And that's also kind of the nice thing about teaching, is like you get a chance with each course to try again, right? There's this iterative improvement process that's happening. And I'm still even thinking about how do I do that now in mid-course with what I'm doing, but then also to program I run for doc students, but then also to thinking of some of my courses in the fall. Got some work to do. And even 2 organizations that I'm a part of. What are we doing to invite people to be into a story, right? How do we leverage not only clarifying our message, but then also inviting people to be a part of something, right? And how do we serve as guides there and make sure that we're not positioning ourselves as the hero, right? So even think about little things like, how do we position seats in a classroom, right? Am I positioning them so that everyone's facing me, so it kind of looks like I'm a hero, versus are they facing each other? Like, hey, we're in this together. I don't know. There's lots of things going through my mind. But again, that's why we have the podcast. We're learning how to teach better, and thank you so much for joining me in this journey. So that's going to do it for this episode of Amidon Planet. Show notes can be found at amidonplanet.com/episode 107. Lots of links and content. I mean, JJ has his own podcast, but then he was a part of the Building a StoryBrand podcast, which was an earlier edition of the Business Made Simple podcast. So you have to really scroll back to get to some of those, but it's great content back there. There's so many books and things, and I'll put a bunch of links to it, but there's power in story, right? We talked about that a little bit with Dave Waddell. He's an author that came on. He talks about teaching through story and some of the stories from his past, and he kind of connected them with some of the lessons from the Bible. But similar things here, like we know that story is powerful, and they're trying to help you tap into that. So lots of content there, lots of things you can look at from StoryBrand, free content even. And then if you looking to either buy a book or maybe even go to the workshop that JJ mentioned, again, we'll put a link to all that stuff there. Okay. If you're looking for ways to support the podcast, 1, you're doing it. You're listening. great. 2, you could listen to other episodes. Like, for example, lots of great feedback from the previous episode where we talked to Rick Balkin about his experience in Rwanda. And update on that, he talked about trying to create a course where students from the University of Mississippi will get to go and experience what he did. And he's doing it. He's already, it looks like it's on the books for next February. So if you're interested in that, you can reach out to Rick, find him at the University of Mississippi School of Education directory. You can go there and learn a little bit about that. Even my son listened to it. So hey, it was great. Anyway, so you can listen to previous episodes you want to support. You can also subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff, and even share episodes. So if you think somebody else needs to hear this episode or another episode, share it with them. Again, all that stuff will do is allow more people looking for similar content to find it. So really appreciate it. And again, we're seeing that people are doing that. So please continue to do that. I appreciate y'all. Now, for those of you wanting to engage a little bit further, you can submit a question, comment, or suggestion to the mailbag by sending an email to joel@amazonplanet.com. In addition, I'm always looking for opportunities to work with those who are looking to lead people to love others through teaching. If you have an event or opportunity to share, you can either send an email to joel@amazonplanet.com or head to amazonplanet.com/about to fill out the request a call form. Again, people are doing that, and you're seeing folks that are going to be on this podcast in the near future that were directly from people's suggestions, and appreciate that. It's a community, and it gets even better when more people engage. So if you want to do that, again, use the email, or some of you know other ways to connect with me, so you can do that as well. Thank you for spending time on Amazon Planet. Thank you to J.J. Peterson, Dr. J.J. Peterson, for sharing his time and expertise. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And finally, thank you to all of you out there learning to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.